Well, hello, and welcome to another episode of the Quadruple D. So, in this episode, I'm going to get into Trump's failed Iran war deal negotiations, or whatever you want to call them. Just, the failure of the whole thing. And I'm going to get a little bit into the background of it and, all that kind of stuff. I do want to say first that I used to do these quadruple D episodes like every week, but lately they've been like every few weeks. So expect that to become the norm and stay as the norm. I'm still going to be doing these, but it's not going to be as frequent as it used to be. Every two, maybe even every 3 weeks. I don't know. We'll see how busy I get with other things. But all right, let's look at the main event here. So, Donald Trump claimed on Truth Social, what he laughably calls Truth Social. Of course, that's very Orwellian because he often does not tell the truth, and he's pretty famous for being a liar. But anyway, he said on so called Truth Social that any agreement he reaches with Iran would be fundamentally different from the nuclear arrangement negotiated during the Obama administration. So before I get further into that, let me just note that there's a huge built in irony about the United States finger wagging against any other country when it comes to nuclear weapons, because the United States is the only country on the planet that bombed another country with nukes. So we are literally the last place on earth that should be doing that, the finger wagging thing. No, no, no. Any other country, quite literally any other country on the planet, has more of a right to express such fears and concerns, all right? We're hypocrites, we're bastards, we're dumbasses, we're whatever you want to call us based on that alone. We're already in a failed position just based on the immense hypocrisy of that. And you know what else is frustrating? Very few people ever even point this out. It should be like the entry level observation about this whole fucking thing. They should be like, oh, wait, isn't the United States the only country that ever nuked another country? Well, what are they doing in this negotiation? Get them the fuck out of there. They don't belong. That should be how this should be framed. That is actually the most logical way of looking at this right from the get go. But of course, the world is dumb, people are morons, and all that kind of stuff, so that's not how it's looked at, unfortunately. Anyway, moving on, I'm sorry about the swearing and whatnot, but it's frustrating. It's a source of frustration, and swearing makes you cool too, so that's why I'm doing it as well. Anyway, sorry about that. Trump argued that the earlier accord handed Tehran massive amounts of cash while allegedly creating a clear and open path to a nuclear weapon, a characterization widely disputed by arms control experts. And by the way, he's only concerned about, Iran supposedly getting a massive amount of cash because he wasn't the one getting some of that cash directly. He wants to be involved in that. He wants to get rich because that's what he's using the White House for, obviously. So, anyway, this payout that Trump referred to as massive amounts of cash, well, the original $400 million trust fund is what he's referring to, and that was established by the pre revolutionary Iranian government under Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi, who was heavily backed by the United States. During the 1960s and 1970s, the US backed Shah used Iran's vast oil revenues to purchase billions of dollars in American military hardware. And to facilitate this, Iran deposited money into a U.S. Department of Defense Foreign Military Sales Trust Fund, or the FMS. That's what FMS stands for, Foreign Military Sales. And the $400 million was the remaining unspent cash balance sitting in that account. When the 1979 Islamic Revolution overthrew the Shah, the U.S. froze the trust fund, and subsequently resold the undelivered military equipment. So, how about that? The Algiers Accords arrived in 1981, following the 444-day Iran hostage crisis. The U.S. and the new Islamic Republic signed the Algiers Accords. This treaty created the Iran-U.S. Claims Tribunal at The Hague to settle outstanding financial and property disputes between both nations, and there was an accumulation of interest. Under the rules governing the frozen funds, Iran demanded the return of its principal plus 35 years of accumulated interest. So this led to what is sometimes called the 2016 Compromise, facing an impending ruling by the tribunal that U.S. lawyers feared would result in a much larger multi-billion-dollar judgment. The Obama administration negotiated the interest down to a compromise of $1.3 billion, and the $400 million principal was paid directly from the FMS trust fund, and the $1.3 billion interest was paid out of the U.S. Treasury's judgment fund. So that's what Donald Trump is acting like it's the worst deal of all time. Well, it was not just an ordinary deal, it actually involved, you know, the previous administrations. It was not even Obama's fault, but Trump is so stupid and his supporters are so stupid that they don't realize that Obama was not even around when these things were first established. But, MAGA depends on stupidity, so they think that, oh, it was just Obama who was doing this. Of course, none of those people would likely look into this thing and get all of those details because they don't care about facts. Meanwhile, the 2015 agreement, formerly known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, placed limits on Iran's uranium enrichment and established international inspection measures through the International Atomic Energy Agency in exchange for sanctions relief. So, critics of the deal, including, of course, Trump, the orange one, argued that it only delayed Iran's nuclear capabilities rather than dismantling them completely. So think about that, like, especially in the context, like, now it's even more relevant. After the United States attacked Iran, do you think that they are going to say, oh no, we're not going to develop any new weapons as a deterrent? Like, would that make any sense? If some country attacked us, do you think we would suddenly say, "Oh no, we're not going to have nuclear weapons anymore"? Like, no, that wouldn't make a lot of sense. You'd be more likely to develop weapons of all kinds, because that's just how things often work. We're not a population full of pacifists over here. Now you might say, why can't we all be pacifists? Why can't we all just like hold hands and sing kumbaya or whatever the the stereotypical thing is that pacifists would do? Well, the reason more people don't do that is precisely because of people like Donald Trump, of course. So in his post, Trump insisted that negotiations remain incomplete, and he criticized opponents for attacking a proposal nobody has seen. He also presented himself as a tougher negotiator than previous administrations, repeating a familiar nationalist argument that the United States has historically accepted weak diplomatic arrangements abroad. So that's more of his tough guy talk, because you gotta look tough. Like, you can't be fair, you can't be level headed. I think that's the right expression. You can't be down to earth or any of that kind of stuff. You got to be tough, and that means potentially, blowing people to smithereens, including innocent civilians and all that. So Trump withdrew the U.S. from the Iran nuclear deal in 2018, despite objections from the European allies and warnings from plenty of analysts that abandoning the agreement could escalate regional instability. So after the withdrawal, the U.S. imposed severe sanctions on Iran under the Maximum Pressure Campaign, contributing to major economic hardship for ordinary Iranians while strengthening hardline political factions inside the country. And think about that, like that's a pretty standard thing. If you if you take away resources from a population, you're actually going to make them more dependent on whoever is able to provide those resources. So it's not exactly like a rocket science kind of thing. You don't need to be a political genius to figure that out. Like, if somebody put a massive siege on my neighborhood or something like that, let's make this a local thing. Let's say somebody did that. Well, what would I do? Well, I would want to still have access to food and other resources, and I assume I would try to, you know, get those things from the easiest sources possible. And what do you know? That might involve clinging to the status quo a little bit. And the idea of these sanctions and whatnot, or at least the stated idea, is to make the populations hate the prevailing government that they had lived under. But the problem is, you might become more dependent on them for even things you didn't depend on them for before. So it's actually, in many cases, the exact opposite of what the stated aim is of the oppressive country that is imposing the sanctions. So, according to reports from Axios, Trump also used a conversation with leaders from several Arab and Muslim majority states to push for broader participation in the Abraham Accords. So the Accords, introduced during Trump's first administration, and probably not introduced by him, because what are the odds he even knows what Abraham refers to? I mean, personally, I gotta admit, I don't exactly know what it refers to. Um, but there's almost no chance that Trump knows what Abraham is in reference to. I mean, just to be clear. But anyway, supposedly that normalized relations between Israel and countries including Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates. And during the discussion, Trump reportedly told representatives from Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Pakistan, Turkey, Egypt, Jordan, and Bahrain, and I guess the United Arab Emirates, that he hoped they would eventually join or expand the accords if tensions involving Iran were resolved. Well, I'm pretty sure that the tensions are not being resolved and they're actually being exacerbated. So who knows what's going to happen with that agreement? It seems like it's going to just sort of fizzle out. Several of those countries, including Pakistan and Qatar, or Qatar as some people say, they still do not maintain formal diplomatic relations with Israel. Saudi Arabia has also stopped short of full normalization, partly because of domestic opposition and the unresolved status of the Palestinian territories. Let's just say it like that. Or you could also say the unpopularity of the mass destruction campaign. The mass death in Gaza following the October 2023 Hamas attack further complicated normalization efforts across the region, fueling protests throughout the Middle East and increasing criticism of governments seen as aligning too closely with Israeli or U.S. strategic interests. Basically, we are a toxic brand at this point, and it's only getting worse. So, in my view, the negotiations and alliance building efforts surrounding Iran and the Abraham Accords should be viewed less as peace initiatives and more as maneuvers by competing states seeking military, economic, and geopolitical dominance. We should generally reject, sorry, I said reject wrong. We should generally reject the idea that governments act primarily in the interests of ordinary people and instead emphasize how state power, militarization, sanctions, and nationalist politics often deepen suffering among civilian populations. It's almost like they like the sadistic aspects of it. That would explain why it keeps on happening, right? They like implementing torture, pain, fear, uncertainty, chaos, all of those things that these these different political structures are supposed to prevent. Well, that's exactly the thing that they seem hell-bent on keeping around. The chaos, the destruction, the panic, the fear, the total and complete subservience to stupid ideologies, all that kind of stuff. So, U.S. sanctions on Iran have repeatedly been criticized by humanitarian observers for worsening inflation, limiting access to medicine, and hurting workers, while political elites in both Washington and Tehran continue power struggles. And of course, the U.S. is also trying to play hardball with Cuba. So, I mean, that's already underway. And, not to praise Obama too much, but one thing you could say about Obama is that he was at least semi normalizing relations between the US and Cuba. But now Trump has fucked that up because he's a deviant psychopath, or whatever you want to call him, a authoritarian strongman, I guess would be another term for it. But he never seemed that strong to me. He seems like a weakling who can't stand up to oppressive power at all. He can't criticize, the oil industry, for example, the fossil fuel industry. He is a bitch to those types of organizations. He can't even, you know, criticize any of his, the interests that fully back him. Those crooked bastards. He can't go after them because he's in their pocket. So, the Abraham Accords. I keep fucking up these lines, but the Abraham Accords intensified regional instability rather than reducing it. That is obvious. Increased military cooperation between Israel and Gulf monarchies, encouraged more aggressive regional behavior, and helped create political conditions that have enabled the genocide in Gaza, as well as rising tensions with Iran. I mean, to call them just rising tensions, that seems to be an understatement, but whatever. It's what I put down here. And normalization agreements often sideline or outright massacre people such as the Palestinians, while strengthening authoritarian governments and expanding arms sales throughout the region. Because it's all about those sales, baby. It's all about making that money. And, that's what a lot of people are dying for, is these special corporate interests. Whether it's selling weapons, or the fossil fuel industry, or any number of things like that. I guess in Cuba, it might be the sugar industry. As wild and crazy as that might sound, it sounds silly, right? But Marco Rubio actually has ties to the sugar industry. Look into it. And anyway, that's about all I have to say for this installment. I'm gonna have a part two that I plan on recording tomorrow, and this is gonna be about. Well, I'm gonna talk about two of Trump's fail sons in the next couple of days. One is gonna be Don Jr., and then I'm gonna be looking at Eric. Eric is almost not even worth mentioning because he's like a piece of gum at the bottom of Trump's shoe or something like that. You know, that's kind of what his sons are like. I'm going to talk a little bit about how Trump didn't even attend his own son's wedding. I mean, that's pretty. Think about that. Like, how do you not even laugh at that? It's dark. It is kind of dark, but it's kind of funny. He's like, I'm not attending your wedding because I'm too busy fucking up the world. I got to be ruining the world and making people hate me. I can't be at a celebration of my son and his trophy wife or whatever. I got to be over here causing the end times or whatever. So, you know, Moses Mike Johnson can imagine that Jesus will come back to earth on a winged horse. I assume it'd be a white horse, and everybody who is holy and Christian would ascend up to heaven. You just need to have the right types of conditions. The body count's got to be high enough in Gaza, for Jesus to come back or something like that. I don't know. I don't really know what that ideology is, but it seems like they believe that Israel's expansion is necessary for Jesus to come back to the earth. And, so it's interesting to think about that because where do they even get that idea from? I don't know. Um, I probably heard it at one point, but I might have blocked it out of my brain because it was probably too insane for me to properly process it. And it was probably like one of those in one ear, out the other ear kind of things. So, anyway, that's it for this particular episode. I'm sure you hate it, partly because, I'm butchering some lines here and there, but I just wanted to share my thoughts on the chaos that is unfolding.